Good afternoon, listeners, and today is part 3 on the trauma series, and part 3 is entitled The Neurology Behind Catastrophizing. Okay, in part 1 we looked at what is trauma, part 2 we looked at understanding what is your trauma message, and now part 3 we're going to look at one of the most common things that people do when they're anxious or stressed and having been exposed to trauma is they catastrophize. They make things bigger than what they usually are. And if we understand why, it goes back to what is your trauma message. So what was the message that you got to be able to figure out when you understood what your trauma was? And once you know what that message is, then what you do is you become super aware of how or what type of situations might trigger that trauma message so that you're better equipped in order to be able to cope with those situations or to be able to plan in those situations and give yourself what you need in those situations. Now, if we look at it, when a trauma happens, in your body, you feel different. You feel extremely differently because you feel to the extreme. So you feel intensely. It feels like if your heart's beating intensely. If your mind's thinking intensely. If you're breathing intensely. If you're going to run, you're running intensely. So if you're going to think intensely. And as a result of that, catastrophizing kicks in. So what happens is, in the moment of your trauma, your brain suddenly opens up new neural pathways. So suddenly when you are only able to think about things 70% of the distance and in 70% detail, all of a sudden you can think about things to a 95% level of detail. So I sometimes describe that as also like Pac-Man. If we think about the game Pac-Man and we think of that mouth that goes this way and it goes that way, Pac-Man moves so quickly. But when someone's been traumatized, they can't get their thoughts to go this way and that way so quickly. They're only able to turn around once they've hit the side. And the same happens with catastrophizing. So an example might be somebody who is quite a hypochondriac or lost perhaps a family member through a sudden bout of cancer that wasn't expected, and suddenly they had a pain somewhere in their body and the pain turned cancerous, and then they had this trauma. So suddenly any pain they feel in their body can be catastrophized and made them feel or believe that they have cancer. So an example of this is, you don't just get to have pain. So Pac-Man doesn't just get to go to one side. You feel pain to the extreme that you eventually make yourself believe that it's lethal. You make yourself believe it's fatal. So that thought goes to the extreme because why? Because new neural pathways have opened up in your brain that suddenly make you think until you can't think any further. And that is how catastrophizing starts for anxiety. And that's how your what-ifs become so much more dire and so much more fatalistic. And once you start realizing that your brain is actually programmed to think until it hits the extreme, you can start learning how to identify when it's starting to move in that direction. So instead of allowing the Pac-Man thoughts to go right to the end, you can redirect them so that they can move in the opposite direction. Okay, and if you're able to do that, then you're able to what we call emotionally regulate and ground yourself a little bit quicker so that it doesn't last as long, because often what creates uncontainment in people is that they're in distress for too long, and the more distressed they become, the more and more irrational they become. So it's okay if you catastrophize, because the most important thing is just to know that you do it and to be aware of it and to be able to catch it when you find that it's starting to happen. And if you're someone that you're aware that you do it, that's such a healthy sign, because it's showing you that you can identify that you're catastrophizing and that you know that it's not true, but you're actually just needing those next steps to be able to bring you back to the truth. So be encouraged with that, and just remember that catastrophizing is your brain's way of naturally navigating messages once it's been traumatized. And it's up to you to be able to own that, identify that, and help your brain steer back again so that it doesn't reach the extremities, so it doesn't seek out those intense sensations that go with the extremities, so that you could try avoid any intense emotions to try keep you more in the gray area. I hope that helps, and have a lovely day.